I still remember the night I first arrived at the edge of the old farming valley. The road out here didn't feel like a road at all, more like a forgotten memory stretched in between fields of corn and silence. My headlights kept catching pieces of fog drifting low across the ground, as if the land itself was breathing slowly, refusing to wake up. I had come here for work. Just temporary housing, they said. Just a quiet place to stay while I helped document rural land reports. But there was nothing quiet about this place. The farm stood too still, the barns too dark, and the wind, it never moved in one direction for long, like it couldn't decide where to escape from. On my first night, I noticed something strange. The animals weren't making any sound. No crickets, no dogs, not even the soft rustle of leaves. Only a distant, low humming, like electricity trapped underground, trying to speak through the soil. And then I saw the figure near the farthest fence line, not walking, not running, just standing there, watching the house like it had been waiting for me specifically. That's when I realized this wasn't just a remote farm. It was something that remembered the people who came here, and it never forgot the ones who stayed too long. The road ended without warning. No sign, no marker, just fog and soft earth swallowing the tires of my car. It was late evening, the kind where the sky looks bruised, pale blue fading into gray silence. Fields stretched on both sides, freshly cut, though I couldn't see a single machine that had done it. The smell of wet soil hung in the air, heavy and close, like the land had just been disturbed and never settled again. My headlights swept over a farmhouse in the distance. It shouldn't have been there. Not on any map I checked. Not in any records I had. Still it stood there, waiting. The barn door was slightly open. A pale light flickered inside it, weak and uneven, like a dying breath trapped in glass. The house itself was dark, windows blank, but somehow not empty. I could feel it, watching without eyes. I stepped out of the car. The ground felt softer than it should, damp and warm under my shoes. Each step made no echo, just a dull, swallowed crunch. The wind moved once, then stopped completely, like it had been told to stay still. That's when I noticed the silence. Not normal silence. This was something deeper, like the world had agreed not to speak here. I walked closer to the house. The barn light flickered again, not randomly, but in rhythm, like it noticed me moving, like it was counting. And then I heard it. Footsteps, slow, soft, circling the house from the far side. Not running, not approaching, just walking around me. I turned, expecting to see someone. There was nothing, only tall grass bending slightly, though no wind touched it. The footsteps continued, always just out of sight, always behind the corner I wasn't looking at. The house didn't feel abandoned anymore. It felt occupied. Quietly, carefully, I tried the front door. It wasn't locked. It opened too easily, like it had been waiting for that exact moment. The air inside was colder, carrying the faint scent of dust and old wood and something faintly metallic I couldn't place. The barn light flickered again outside, stronger this time. From inside the house, I could still hear the footsteps circling, now slower, closer, like they had reached the back door. I stood in the hallway without moving. The floor beneath me felt slightly uneven, like it had shifted over time, adjusting itself. The walls creaked softly, not from age but from pressure, as if something outside was leaning in, listening. I didn't know how long I stood there. Time felt thinner here, hard to measure. Then the barn light went steady. No flicker, no pulse, just a fixed, pale glow through the window. And in that stillness, I realized something I didn't want to understand. The farm wasn't empty. It wasn't abandoned. It was aware, and it had already started reacting to me, like I was something it had been waiting to recognize. The footsteps stopped. Everything went silent again. But this time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt focused, like the entire farm was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. The night settled over the farm without stars. Only a dull gray sky pressed low above the fields, heavy and close, like it had dropped closer just to listen. I stayed inside the farmhouse, but sleep never came. The air felt too still, too arranged, as if even breathing was being noticed. Every creak of wood beneath me sounded delayed, like the house was thinking before responding. Then I heard it, a low mechanical groan. Not loud, not sudden, just awakening somewhere beyond the walls. I moved to the window. The field outside was dim, coated in faint mist that clung to the ground like spilled breath. And there, near the far edge of the land, the tractor stood. It hadn't been there before. Old, rusted, forgotten, its shape barely visible until the faint light from the barn touched it. And then it started. No ignition, no spark, just movement. The engine turned over with a slow, dragging hum, like something deep inside it was waking up unwillingly. The sound wasn't normal. It carried a rhythm that almost felt like a voice, low, broken, repeating something just beneath understanding. I stepped closer to the glass. My breath fogged it instantly, even though the room wasn't cold before. The tractor rolled forward, slowly, carefully, as if it already knew the path it was meant to take. No driver, no control, only motion to the field like it belonged to something unseen sitting inside it. The soil beneath its wheels began to change, not just compress, but pulsing, rising slightly, falling again like the ground was breathing in sync with the machine. I felt my throat tighten without reason. The tractor continued across the field, turning slightly on its own. The tires left deep marks that didn't look like tracks, but impressions, like something heavy had pressed itself into the earth and refused to let go. And then I noticed something behind it. Footprints, fresh, leading out from the barn into the mud and stopping abruptly near where the tractor had begun moving. No return path, no continuation, just arrival and disappearance. The engine sound deepened, stretching longer, lower. It no longer felt like machinery. It felt like something trying to speak through metal that wasn't designed for it. A slow, dragging sentence without words. The tractor turned at the far end of the field, and for a moment, it faced the house directly. I stepped back from the window without realizing it. The headlights flickered on, not bright, not sharp, pale, weak, like tired eyes opening after too long a sleep. They swept across the land, then stopped on the farmhouse, and stayed there. The engine idled, but it wasn't idle at all. It was breathing, slow, patient, waiting. I realized something then. It wasn't working the field. It was circling something, observing it, measuring me. The tractor didn't move again for a long moment. Only the hum continued, steady now, like a thought it couldn't stop thinking. Then, finally, it turned away. But even as it moved off into the field, I felt it wasn't leaving, only repositioning. The footprints near the barn had not changed. Still fresh, still ending too soon, and the soil beneath them still pulsed faintly like something underneath had learned how to breathe through it. The night grew heavier after the tractor went silent. Not quieter, heavier, like the air itself had gained weight and settled against the walls of the farmhouse. I stayed near the hallway window, watching the barn across the field. It stood there like it had always stood there, but something about it no longer felt still, though it seemed darker now, soaked in shadow that didn't match the faint moonlight above. Then the light turned on. A single bulb inside the barn flickered alive, pale, weak, suspended in dust-filled air. It didn't brighten the space, it revealed it in pieces, like the darkness inside wasn't fully willing to leave. I didn't move. The light pulsed once, then again, not random, not broken, rhythmic, like it was reacting to something outside the barn, something standing too close. I stepped nearer to the glass. The window felt colder than the room behind me. My reflection looked slightly delayed, like it wasn't fully keeping up. Inside the barn, shadows began to form, not cast by objects, but forming on their own, thin shapes shifting along the walls, stretching and collapsing like they were trying to imitate movement they had seen before. A shape raised its arm. Another followed half a second later, too slow to be natural, too precise to be accidental. The bulb flickered again. This time it responded. Every flicker matched my smallest movement. When I tilted my head, it dimmed slightly. When I stepped back, it brightened just a fraction, as if it was watching me through light itself. A tight pressure formed in my chest. Not fear yet, something worse. Awareness that I was part of this exchange now. The barn light stayed steady for a few seconds, long enough for me to almost convince myself it was normal. Then I noticed something inside the glow. Not a shadow, not an object, but a presence within the light itself. Like something was suspended inside the bulb, pressing outward without breaking it. The air around the barn seemed to bend slightly whenever the light pulsed, like reality was being stretched in there. I blinked. When I opened my eyes again, one of the shadow shapes inside the barn was closer to the doorway. It hadn't crossed the space. It had simply appeared nearer. My breath caught without sound. The light flickered harder now, faster, almost excited, almost aware that I was noticing it. And then it stopped flickering completely. Just steady brightness. Fixed. The barn looked open in a way it hadn't before. Not physically, but visually, like the light had erased depth and left only surface. And in that flat glow, I realized something I didn't want to confirm. The shadows inside were no longer imitating movement. They were waiting for instruction. Not from each other. Not from the barn. From me. I stepped away from the window slowly. But even without looking back, I could still feel the light holding steady. Watching. Not through glass anymore, but through attention itself. The cornfields stretched farther than they should have. Even in daylight they felt endless. But now, under the dim collapse of night, they seemed to expand into something deeper than land. I hadn't planned to go outside again, but the sound made me. At first, it was almost mistaken for wind. A soft shift through the stalks. A slow brushing of leaves against themselves. Then it formed into something clearer. My name, not spoken loudly, not shouted, just threaded through the corn like it had always been there, waiting to be heard. I froze at the edge of the field. The farmhouse light behind me felt distant now, like it belonged to another world entirely. Ahead, the corn moved in small, uneven waves, even though the air was still. I stepped forward without meaning to. The moment my foot touched the soil, the whisper returned. Closer this time. Not one voice. Many, layered over each other like broken recordings played at slightly different times. Some soft, some sharp, some almost childlike. Calling me. The sound didn't come from a direction. It came from everywhere inside the field at once. I turned slightly. The stalks behind me were no longer aligned the way I remembered. Paths had formed where there were none before. Narrow, dark, leading deeper in. I didn't remember them being there earlier. A faint laugh echoed suddenly. Small, light, almost playful. But it didn't belong to anything alive I could imagine. It drifted through the corn, weaving between stalks without touching them. I stepped back. The laugh stopped instantly. Silence followed so fast it felt like impact. Then the whisper returned again, but now it was closer than before. Right beside my ear, though nothing was there. My breath felt too loud in comparison. Each inhale scraped against the quiet like it didn't belong. I noticed movement just beyond the corner of my vision. A shape, not fully formed, just a distortion between stalks. Like something tall bending the corn aside without ever touching it directly. I tried to focus on it. It stopped moving, not hiding, waiting. The corn around me shifted slightly again, paths adjusting, reforming, like the field was rewriting itself based on where I stood. And then I understood something I didn't want to think too clearly. The field wasn't guiding me deeper. It was rearranging itself, so I wouldn't find a way back out. The whispering continued, softer now, almost comforting, like it wanted me to relax, to keep walking, to stop resisting. Another laugh echoed, closer this time, but this one didn't fade. It stayed, somewhere ahead in the corn, waiting in place. And for the first time, I realized the most unsettling part. Whatever was in there, it already knew exactly how far I had come. The morning arrived without warmth. Only a pale, washed-out light spread across the fields, like the sun was reluctant to fully rise over this place. I hadn't slept. Not really. The whispers from the corn still lingered in my thoughts, faint but persistent, like they had followed me back into the house and decided to stay. When I finally looked outside, I saw him, a silhouette standing in the field. Still, perfectly still. It was early enough that the mist hadn't fully lifted. The shape appeared half-formed in it, like the land hadn't decided whether to reveal him completely or keep him hidden. He wore old farming clothes, worn fabric, hanging loose, stained by time rather than weather. But it was a face that wasn't there. Not missing, just replaced, with something darker. Something that didn't reflect light properly. A shifting void where features should have been. I didn't move for a long moment. The figure didn't either. It stood facing the house, not approaching, not retreating, just present, as if it had always been there and only now allowed itself to be noticed. I stepped closer to the window. The glass felt colder again, even though the morning air outside should have been mild. My reflection overlapped faintly with the figure in the field, like the distance between us was thinner than it should be. Then I noticed something else. The same figure was also farther away, not moving between positions, just existing in more than one place at once. One near the fence line, one deeper in the field, one almost lost in the mist, all standing still, all facing the house. I stepped back slowly. The house creaked softly in response, like it was adjusting to my movement. A thought formed I didn't want to accept. This wasn't a person visiting the farm. It was something that belonged to it, something that never left. Later that day, I found a small note pinned near the doorway. I hadn't heard anyone approach. The paper was old, softened at the edges, the writing uneven, like it had been done quickly or under pressure. It mentioned names, several, people who had stayed here before, workers, travelers, others who had come for temporary work. Each name was crossed out, one by one, until only empty space remained at the bottom, as if the list expected more entries. When I looked back outside, the figure was still there, closer now, not by distance, but by clarity, the edges of its shape sharper than before, as if the mist had stopped protecting my sight from it. And for the first time, I noticed something about its posture. It wasn't watching the house. It was waiting for something inside it to respond. The wind picked up slightly then, just enough to move the grass in uneven waves. And for a brief moment, I thought I heard something beneath it. Not a voice, not a whisper, more like a memory trying to surface through soil. The farmer didn't move. But the longer I looked at him, the more I felt like I was the one being measured now. Quietly, patiently, like I had finally become part of the same list. And it was only a matter of time before my name stopped being new. The ground changed after the farmer appeared. Not visibly at first, but in the way it felt under my feet. Softer in some places, hollow in others, like the earth was no longer consistent, like it had gaps I couldn't see. I walked behind the farmhouse that afternoon. The air smelled damp, heavier than before, carrying a faint metallic trace that made it hard to breathe deeply. That's when I noticed the patch of soil. It looked normal, almost too normal. Flat ground between uneven grass, slightly darker than everything around it, but something about it felt placed, like it didn't grow there naturally. I stepped closer. The ground gave a faint warmth through my shoes. Not heat, not sunlight, something else, alive in a way that didn't belong to anything underground. I crouched down and brushed the soil aside with my hand. It came away too easily, like it had been loosened recently, even though there were no marks around it. And then I saw it, a rim, stone, circular, a well, hidden just beneath the surface, as if the land had been trying to forget it existed. The moment I uncovered more of it, a sound rose from inside, a low hum, soft, continuous, not mechanical, not natural. It vibrated through the stone itself, like the well wasn't making noise, but holding in place. I pulled my hand back instinctively. The hum didn't stop. It stayed, constant, patient, like it had been waiting for someone to notice it again. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The sound wasn't gone. It felt closer now, even from inside the house. At midnight, I went back. The farm was completely still. No wind, no insects, just that distant, steady hum beneath everything else. I stood over the well. The air above it felt warmer than the rest of the field. Not comfortingly warm, wrong warm, like breath trapped under stone. I picked up a small rock and dropped inside. It fell too slowly. The sound of impact never came immediately. Instead, there was a delay, a pause that stretched longer than it should have, then a splash. But it didn't sound like water. It sounded distant, like it had happened somewhere far away, not directly below me. And then I heard it, the answer, a second splash, but delayed even further, as if something had responded after thinking about it. I stepped back from the well. The hum shifted slightly in pitch. Not louder, not softer, aware, like it had noticed my reaction. The soil around the rim began to feel warmer again, spreading outward in slow waves. And then, for just a moment, I thought I heard something beneath the hum. Not a voice, not words, more like a pressure-forming sound, as if something far below the farm had moved and realized it was being listened to. I looked down into the well again. The darkness inside wasn't empty anymore. It felt occupied, not with presence I could see, but with attention that had finally turned upward. The radio stopped working properly after the well. Not completely, just enough to make everything feel unreliable. Static would rise between stations, then clear suddenly into voices that didn't match the frequency. That morning, I tried again. The sky outside was wrong. Not stormy, not clear, just uncertain, like it couldn't decide what it was supposed to become. I turned the radio dial slowly, and for a moment, I caught a weather report. The voice was calm, too calm. It spoke about storms moving across regions that didn't exist on any map I knew. Cloud systems forming over empty coordinates. Pressure drops that had no source. Then it mentioned this valley. The words came through slightly distorted, as if the signal didn't want to carry them. Localized atmospheric disturbance. A pause, centered around the farm. I looked out the window. The fields were still. The barn stood unchanged. But the air itself felt denser, like it was being pressed downward from above. The radio continued. It said there was thunder, but I couldn't see any clouds that could make it. Still, I heard it, a low roll across the sky. Not distant, not fading, directly overhead, like something enormous walking across the ceiling of the world. I stepped outside slowly. The ground felt slightly vibrating under my feet, even though nothing moved. The cornfield in the distance leaned in subtle directions, as if listening upward instead of outward. The radio inside the house cracked again through the open door. Another update, but this time the voice changed. It repeated my location incorrectly, then corrected itself, then repeated again, each time sounding less certain, as if the system was learning something it wasn't meant to know. Then the lightning came, but there were no clouds to carry it, just a sudden white fracture across the sky. Instant, silent, and in that single flash, I saw something above the farm. A shape, not fully formed, not stable, like the outline of something massive pressing through layers of atmosphere that weren't meant to bend. It wasn't falling. It wasn't flying. It was present, above everything, watching everything at once. The radio inside the house screamed static for a moment before cutting out completely. The silence afterward felt heavier than before. Even the wind refused to return. I stood still, staring at the sky as it slowly sealed itself again, hiding whatever had been there. But the image stayed behind my eyes, not as memory, as recognition. Like something inside me had briefly understood what it was seeing, and now refused to forget it. A low rumble rolled again overhead. Not thunder this time. More like a step taken too slowly across something too large to comprehend. And in that moment, I realized the weather was never reporting storms. It was reporting movement. Something vast, moving just above the farm, and noticing when it was being watched. The shed appeared simple at first. Just a small structure behind the farmhouse, half hidden by tall grass and leaning shadows. I had seen it the day I arrived, or I thought I had, but now it felt closer, larger somehow, like it had shifted overnight without ever being touched. The wood was old, weathered in uneven lines. Some planks looked darker than others, as if they had absorbed more time than the rest. I stood a few steps away from it, and I noticed something strange. It moved, not like an animal, not like wind pushing it. A slow, subtle expansion, then a pause, then a slight contraction, like something inside it was breathing. I told myself it was the wind, but the air around me was still, completely still. No rustle, no movement, only that steady, impossible rhythm coming from the shed. In and out, I stepped closer. The ground beneath it felt softer, almost damp, like the shed was sitting on soil that never fully dried. Each step made a muted sound, quickly swallowed by the silence around it. The door was slightly open, just enough to reveal darkness inside. Not normal darkness. This one felt layered, thick, like it had depth beyond the wooden frame. I didn't remember opening it, or anyone else doing so, but it was open anyway. A soft creak came from inside. Not the door. Something else. Something shifting in place. I hesitated. Then I stepped forward. The moment I did, the breathing stopped. Instantly, as if the shed had been caught doing something it wasn't supposed to reveal. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. Too aware, too intentional. I looked inside. Tools hung neatly along the walls. Too neatly, like they had been placed for display rather than use. But I noticed something wrong. They weren't just arranged. They were rearranging themselves. Slowly, between blinks. A hammer slightly lower than before. A saw turned in a different direction. A hook, now empty where something had just been hanging. I stepped back. The shed did not move, but I felt it watching me leave anyway. That night, I couldn't sleep again. And at around midnight, I heard it. The breathing returned. Not from outside the house. From behind it. I went to the window slowly. The shed was visible in the distance, barely lit by the faint glow from the barn. It looked normal again. Too normal. But I knew better now, because I could hear it clearly through the walls. A slow inhale, a longer exhale, measured, controlled, like something inside it had learned the rhythm of pretending to be a structure instead of a living thing. Then, for a brief moment, the shed's shape seemed to deepen, not grow, not shift position, just hollow out further inside itself, as if making room for something that was never meant to fit. And right before I moved away from the window, I heard something else inside it, not breathing, but the pause between breaths, stretching longer than it should, like it was waiting to see if I hadn't noticed. The next morning, the fog never fully lifted. It stayed low across the fields, thick and unmoving, like the land had decided to keep a blanket over itself. I noticed the scarecrow then. It stood at the far edge of the cornfield. I was sure it hadn't been there the day before. Or maybe it had, but farther away, less defined, less real. Now it was clear enough to see details. Old cloth wrapped around a wooden frame. A hat tilted slightly forward. Arms stretched outward in a shape meant to resemble comfort, but failing completely. The birds didn't go near it, not even by accident. The air around it felt wrong, empty in a way that made sound feel unnecessary. I watched it for a long time. It didn't move, not even when the wind tried once, weakly, to pass through the field. Still, something felt off. The way it stood wasn't natural for wood. Too balanced, too intentional. That night, I checked again. It had moved. Not far, but enough. Closer to the farmhouse. The distance between it and the cornfield edge had changed without any sign of passage. No bent grass. No disturbed soil. Just a new position. As if the world had skipped a frame and forgotten to show me how it happened. I told myself it was my mistake. Until the next morning. It was closer again. Now standing where the field begins to slope toward the house. The hat still tilted forward. Still watching. Even without a face. I tried to convince myself it was impossible. That it was just perspective. Light. Fog. Anything explainable. But the feeling in my chest wouldn't accept it. Because nothing else in this place ever moved normally. That night, I stayed awake longer. I watched the window carefully, waiting for any sign of motion, any proof that I wasn't imagining it. The farmhouse creaked softly. The shed breathed somewhere behind me. The barn light flickered in its slow rhythm. And then I saw it again. The scarecrow, closer still, now near the midpoint of the field. I hadn't seen it cross the distance. I hadn't heard anything move, but it was there. And for the first time, I noticed something worse than its position. Its head was slightly more turned toward the house. Not fully, not dramatically, just enough to suggest awareness. Like it was no longer just facing the farm. It was focusing on it. On me. I stepped back from the window, slowly. The glass reflected only darkness behind me, but I could still feel outside, patient, unchanging in posture, waiting for the next time I looked away, so it could move again. The nights had started to feel predictable in their wrongness. The same silence, the same weight in the air, the same sense that the farm was awake even when nothing moved. But that night, something changed in a small, precise way. A sound at the door. Not a knock, not a crash, just a soft placement, like something had been set down carefully. Trying not to be noticed, I waited before moving. Seconds stretched too long. The house seemed to listen with me. Then I opened the door. A glass bottle sat on the steps. Milk inside it, pale and still. No note, no packaging, no sign of who left it. Only the faint smell of cold air around it. Except the milk itself was warm in a way that didn't belong to the night. I picked it up slowly. The glass was slightly fogged, as if it had just been held by someone moments ago. But there were no footprints on the steps, no movement in the field, no sound of departure, only silence stretching outward from the house. I brought the bottle inside. I didn't drink it at first. I just left it on the table and watched it. The milk inside didn't settle. It moved slightly, not swirling, not shaking, just adjusting, like it was aware of being observed. Hours passed like that. Then, without deciding to, I drank it. The taste wasn't wrong. That was the problem. It was familiar, too familiar, like something I had tasted before, but couldn't remember when or where. The moment it reached my throat, the room changed. Not physically, but perceptually. The farmhouse around me felt larger for a second, older, lived in, and I saw something that wasn't there before. A memory, not mine. Fields, hands working soil. A voice calling from somewhere behind me, saying words I couldn't understand but still somehow recognized. I dropped the glass. It didn't break immediately. It hit the table, then slid slowly, like gravity was uncertain whether it should fully apply. A distant engine sound drifted in after midnight, low, rattling, like a truck moving far away on a road that didn't exist here. I went to the window. Nothing was there. No headlights. No movement. But the sound continued, circling, returning, never approaching fully, always just out of reach, like it was delivering something without ever arriving. The milk bottle was gone by morning. No trace of glass. No spill. No stain, only a faint damp ring on the table, still warm to the touch. And outside, near the edge of the field, the scarecrow stood a little closer again. But this time, I noticed something else. The direction it faced had changed slightly, not toward the cornfield anymore, not toward the road, but toward the farmhouse window where I had been standing when I drank the milk. Like it had been watching the exact moment I stopped being just an observer and became part of whatever farm was keeping track of. The farmhouse had started to feel less like a structure and more like something layered, like every wall was hiding a second version of itself beneath the surface. That morning, I noticed a seam in the hallway wall, a thin line I hadn't seen before, too straight to be natural, too clean for age. I pressed my hand against it. The wood felt normal at first, then slightly warm, then uneven, like something behind it was shifting in response. A faint click echoed inside the wall. Not loud, not sharp, just final. The seam widened, slowly, without effort, and a door appeared where there had been only solid wall before. No hinges I could see, no frame that matched the rest of the house. Just a door that had decided it belonged there. I stood still for a long moment. The house itself seemed quieter around it, like everything else had stepped back to give it space. Then I opened it. The air inside changed immediately. Older, dustier, but not abandoned. It felt preserved. A room revealed itself behind the door, perfectly intact, but wrong in its stillness. The furniture was old-fashioned. Wooden table, narrow bed, curtains faded by time. Yet everything looked recently arranged, like someone had just left and would return any moment. I stepped inside slowly. The floorboards didn't creak. They absorbed the sound completely. On the table were personal items. A pocket watch, a folded note, a small farming tool polished clean. None of it belonged to me, but something about it felt familiar in a way that made my thoughts uncomfortable. Like I had seen these things before, in a place I couldn't remember visiting. The note had names written on it. Some were crossed out, some weren't, but I recognized the pattern now. This wasn't a list. It was a record, a cycle. I turned slowly. The room behind me felt slightly different than when I entered. The bed was closer to the wall now. The curtains slightly more open. I hadn't seen anything move, but the room had changed anyway, as if it was adjusting itself while I wasn't paying attention. A soft sound came from the wardrobe in the corner. Not a knock, not movement of wood, more like fabric shifting against something that was breathing too quietly to be obvious. I didn't open it, but I didn't need to. The presence behind it made itself clear in the way the air tightened near that corner, like the room itself was trying not to acknowledge it. I stepped back toward the door, but the hallway outside looked slightly different when I glanced at it. Longer, narrower, like distance had been added while I wasn't looking. The hidden room remained behind me, quiet, patient, preserved, and yet not empty. I realized something standing there. This room wasn't forgotten. It was kept, maintained, for something that still knew how to return to it. The farm animals changed after the hidden room appeared. Not in behavior at first, but in attention. It started with the cattle in the far pasture. I noticed them standing too still in the morning fog. Their shapes lined up like they had been placed rather than gathered naturally. No grazing, no shifting, no sound, just watching. All of them facing the farmhouse at the same time. I told myself it was coincidence, until I walked outside. The moment the door opened, every head turned slightly. Not quickly, not startled, synchronized, like a single thought moving through all of them at once. Their eyes didn't blink. They just held, fixed on me. The air around the field felt wrong again. Thicker, expectant. I stepped forward slowly. The ground made no sound under their gaze. Even my movement felt muted, like the land didn't want to interrupt what was happening. A goat near the fence shifted one step, then stopped. The others followed a second later, one by one, in delayed imitation, not independent movement, echoed movement, as if they were repeating instructions they had already received. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept the lights off and watched from the window. The animals had not dispersed. They remained gathered in the same formation, facing the house, waiting. Hours passed. The fog thickened. The barn light flickered once in the distance, then steadied again. And still the animals did not move, not even when the wind tried briefly to return. Then, just before midnight, something shifted. A cow lowered its head slightly, not grazing, not resting, listening, and the rest followed, one by one. A synchronized motion that felt rehearsed too many times to be accidental. I realized I was holding my breath without meaning to. The animals were no longer just watching. They were responding to something I couldn't hear, something that didn't need sound to communicate. The silence between them felt structured now, like a pattern, like a message forming without words. I stepped back from the window slowly, but I couldn't stop looking, because for a brief moment, I thought I saw something reflected in their eyes. Not the farmhouse, not the field, something deeper, like another version of the sky pressing down through their gaze, a place I wasn't meant to recognize. And then, all at once, they turned slightly more toward the house, not moving closer, just focusing harder, as if whatever they were watching had finally made itself clear enough to notice, and I was no longer just near it. I was inside its attention. The wind returned after days of absence, but it didn't arrive like weather should. It arrived like a decision, slow at first, a faint shift through the fields, corn bending in uneven waves that didn't match direction or rhythm. I stood outside the farmhouse, listening. At first, it sounded almost normal, just air moving through space. Then it changed. Words began to form inside it, not clearly at first, broken fragments, misaligned syllables, but unmistakably structured. Sentences. The wind spoke my name first. Soft, measured, like it had said it many times before and was simply repeating it again. I froze where I stood. The air around me felt colder, but not temperature-wise. More like it was subtracting warmth from thought itself. Then the second sentence came. Not loud, not sharp, just placed into the space around me. Do not go back inside. I turned toward the farmhouse instinctively. The windows were still, the walls unchanged, but the feeling inside them shifted slightly, like something had reacted to being mentioned. The wind continued. It didn't rush. It didn't scatter. It spoke in full phrases now. Each one spaced apart, like careful instruction. Each one directed at me. Not commands exactly. Warnings shaped like memory. I didn't understand how it knew what it knew, but it did. The words began referencing things I had never spoken aloud. Thoughts I had only had briefly. Ideas I had dismissed before fully forming them. And yet the wind carried them back to me as if they had already happened. The trees around the house bent slightly inward, not toward the wind direction, toward the farmhouse itself, like they were leaning closer to listen. The wind spoke again, this time slower, heavier. You're already inside. I stepped back without meaning to. The ground felt uneven again, like it was adjusting to that statement being spoken. A pause followed, too long. Then the wind added something quieter, almost gentle. You remember it wrong. My chest tightened. Not fear exactly. Disorientation. Like something fundamental had been loosened inside perception itself. I tried to focus on the barn, the field, anything stable. But even those felt less certain now. The wind circled the house slowly, not passing through it, not avoiding it, just moving around it as if it had defined boundaries that everything else obeyed. And then it spoke again, closer this time, inside my hearing, not outside it. You were here before you arrived. The silence that followed felt final. Even the corn stopped shifting. Even the distant animals stopped reacting. Everything waited, as if the statement had rewritten something important enough that the world needed a moment to adjust. I looked at the farmhouse again, and for the first time, I wasn't sure I was seeing it for the first time. The wind didn't speak again after that, but it didn't leave either. It stayed, as if it had already said everything I needed to understand. I decided to leave the farm, not out of courage, out of necessity, because staying felt less like waiting and more like being counted. The road looked normal in the morning light, thin gravel stretching out between fields, fading into distant haze. The kind of road that should lead somewhere simple. I walked it for a long time. At first, it felt like progress. The farmhouse slowly shrinking behind me, the barn becoming just a shape in the distance, the fields flattening into familiar rural emptiness. But the silence didn't change. It followed. Not behind me exactly, but around me, like the air itself was part of the route. I kept walking. Minutes passed, maybe more. Hard to tell here. Time didn't feel steady once I left the yard. Then I saw it. The barn. Ahead of me. The same barn I had left behind. Standing exactly where it had been before. I stopped. Looked back. The farmhouse was still there. Closer than it should have been. Not behind me in distance, but behind me in position. Like I had taken a step forward, and the world had folded instead of moved. I turned again. The road stretched forward once more. So I walked, faster this time. The fields on either side changed slightly as I passed. Subtle differences. Corn density, fence alignment, the angle of distant trees. But the destination never changed. The farmhouse returned again. Same distance, same silence. I stopped walking completely. The road still extended ahead, but now it looked slightly different, like it had been repaired while I wasn't watching. I tried a different direction, left through the field, then right along the tree line. Each time I returned, not by force, by correction, like the land was refusing to allow deviation. Time outside the farm felt delayed. My movements arrived slightly after I made them. My thoughts fell a fraction behind my actions. Even my breathing sounded unfamiliar, as if it belonged to a slightly different version of me. I finally stood still in the middle of the road, and that's when I noticed it. The road wasn't looping. It was breathing, expanding and contracting subtly beneath the gravel, guiding direction like muscle memory instead of terrain. The farm wasn't behind me anymore. It was everywhere the road led. Behind, ahead, sideways, all variations of the same place. A faint hum rose underground, the same hum I had heard at the well. But now it wasn't below me. It was all around me. The road didn't want me lost. It wanted me returned. And in that moment, I understood something worse than being trapped. I wasn't trying to escape a location. I was trying to leave something that considered itself continuous. And every path I took was just another way of coming back into it. I found the photograph on the farmhouse table the next morning. I hadn't placed it there. I was certain of that. It lay flat against the wood, perfectly centered, as if the table had been waiting to present it. The image showed the farm, but not the version I knew. The fields were slightly different. The barn stood at a sharper angle. The light in the sky looked older, faded in a way that suggested time rather than weather. I picked it up carefully. The paper felt cold, not room temperature. Cold like something stored away for too long. At first, I thought it was just an old picture. Then I noticed movement, very subtle, a shift in the background that didn't belong to a static image, a shadow that hadn't been there before. Standing near the barn, I stared longer. The longer I looked, the clearer it became. The photograph wasn't frozen. It was updating, slowly, imperceptibly, like time was still passing inside it. Even if it wasn't supposed to. The next morning, I checked it again. Something had changed. A new figure stood closer to the farmhouse now, not fully formed, not clear, just present enough to notice. I didn't recognize it, but something about its shape made my stomach tighten, like it was almost familiar in a way I couldn't safely identify. The farm in the photo looked slightly closer too, as if the camera itself had stepped forward. On the third day, I saw myself, not clearly at first, a faint outline near the edge of the field, standing where I had been the night before. But the angle was wrong. I wasn't looking at the farm. I was looking toward it. I dropped the photograph immediately. It didn't land wrong. It landed normally. That was worse. Normal gravity felt suspicious here. I picked it up again after a long pause. The image had already changed slightly. The figure near the barn was closer again, now almost halfway between barn and house. And behind it, more shapes appeared. Not added, not drawn, revealed like they had always been there, just waiting for attention to make them visible. That night, I left the photograph face down, but in the dark, I still felt it, like it was continuing to change even without being seen. I woke up once around midnight. The room was silent, too silent, the kind that makes furniture feel temporary. I turned on the light and checked the table. The photograph had moved slightly, not location. Angle. It was tilted toward the bed, toward where I had been sleeping. And in the image, the figure that looked like me was no longer standing still. It was closer to the farmhouse now, closer than I remembered, and facing inward, like it had already entered the next moment, and was simply waiting for me to catch up. The power didn't go out. It changed. That was the only way I could describe it later, because nothing simply stopped here. It always turned into something else first. It began with a faint flicker in the lamps, a hesitation in the light, like it was unsure whether it wanted to exist fully. Then the silence shifted, not broken, just redistributed. The farmhouse felt electrically aware, like every wire inside it had become part of a larger nervous system I hadn't been told about. I stood in the hallway as the lights dimmed again, not dark yet, just unstable, the kind of light that makes shadows feel unfinished. Outside, the barn light flickered once, then the shed responded, then the fields. One by one, small sources of illumination across the farm began to behave as if they were communicating, not randomly, in sequence, like signals passing between them. The radio inside the house crackled without being touched. A long burst of static filled the room, then stopped, then started again. Each interruption slightly different in tone, like the static itself was evolving. I didn't touch it, but it still tuned itself. Across the valley, I saw other lights flicker too. Distant houses, empty structures, things I hadn't paid attention to before, all reacting at the same time, as if the entire region had been plugged into the same unstable circuit. Then the shadows began to separate. At first, I thought it was just light distortion, but the shadow of the chair in the corner moved slightly after the chair itself stopped moving. A delay, a disconnect, like it had forgotten it was supposed to stay attached. I stepped back slowly. The shadow followed a second later, not independently, but incorrectly timed, as if something was pulling reality a fraction behind itself. The house grew quieter, not empty, stripped, like sound had been reduced to only what was absolutely necessary. Then I heard it, movement through the walls. Not footsteps, not settling wood, something flowing, like electricity moving where it was never meant to move. The lights cut out completely, but darkness didn't come, not fully. Instead, everything became visible in a low, unnatural outline, edges glowing faintly, surfaces defined by absence of light rather than presence of it. And in that outline, I saw something moving through the wiring system of the house, not traveling along it, passing through it, like the wires were no longer infrastructure. They were pathways, veins. The radio turned on again by itself, static first, then something that almost resembled speech, but not language I could recognize, not even distorted words, more like intention trying to become sound. The barn light outside flickered in response, then the shed, then the field lamps, a synchronized pattern forming across the entire farm again. But this time, I understood what it meant. It wasn't communication. It was alignment. Something inside the system was waking up fully, and every part of the farm was adjusting itself to match it. The final flicker came from inside the walls, not outside light, inside, as if the house itself had become the source of illumination for a moment. And in that instant, I realized the power had not gone wrong. It had been redirected, and I was still standing inside whatever it had been rerouted toward. The silo had always been there. I just hadn't noticed how much it belonged to the farm until everything else started changing. It stood at the edge of the property, tall and cylindrical, half swallowed by fog most days. But now, it felt louder than the barn, more present than the house. I heard it before I saw it, a soft sound rising from inside it, not wind, not metal shifting. Voices, layered, overlapping, speaking at the same time, without ever forming a single clear sentence. I walked toward it slowly. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the ground was trying to discourage approach without making it obvious. The silo's metal surface was cold even from a distance, damp with condensation that shouldn't have been there in still air. The voices continued, not louder as I got closer, more detailed, as if proximity was improving clarity instead of volume. I placed my hand on the metal. It vibrated slightly, not from machinery, from something inside responding to contact. The voices shifted immediately. A pause. Then they turned toward me, not physically, but in attention, like the silo had just realized it was being listened to. I climbed the ladder slowly. Each rung was colder than the last. The air around me grew thinner, not in oxygen, but in certainty. At the top, the opening looked normal, dark, circular, empty, but the voices didn't match what I was seeing. They suggested depth that wasn't visible, like the inside was larger than the outside allowed. I hesitated before looking down. The moment I did, the voices stopped. All at once. Perfect silence. That was worse, because the silence felt organized, intentional, like something had instructed everything inside to stop speaking at the same time. Then, after a long pause, one voice returned. Close. Not echoing. Not layered. Direct. It said nothing I could translate, but I understood the meaning anyway. Recognition. I stepped back instinctively. The metal beneath my hand felt warmer now. Not heat exactly. More like awareness spreading through it. The air inside the silo shifted slightly, as if something had moved deeper down. Not upward. Not toward me, but adjusting its position relative to me, as if it had been waiting for me to look long enough to confirm something. The voices began again after I stepped away, but now they were different, slower, more ordered, like they were no longer speaking randomly. They were repeating something, a pattern, a structure, something that felt like instruction rather than speech. I didn't stay to listen longer, but even as I walked away, I could still feel behind me. Not the sound, the attention, like the silo wasn't a place where voices were trapped. It was a place where something was learning how to speak correctly by listening to everything that came near it. After the silo, I stopped trusting anything that felt like it was built to contain sound. Walls, metal, even silence itself. Everything here held things, not to protect people from them, but to keep them close. The next thing I noticed was beneath the fields. It wasn't visible at first, only felt, a vibration that came and went like a pulse just under awareness. Not strong enough to shake the ground, just enough to make stillness feel unreliable. I stood near the edge of the farmland where the soil turned rough and uneven, and that's when I saw the lines. Thin markers cut through the land, old utility paths, forgotten wiring routes, field lines. They should have been dead, but they weren't. A faint hum traveled through them, not loud, not mechanical, more like something breathing through a buried structure that had never been shut off properly. I crouched down and placed my hand on the soil above one of the lines. Warmth returned immediately, not from the sun, from below. It felt like something underneath the farm was awake again, and these lines were just its surface nerves. The hum changed pitch, just slightly. In response to me, I pulled my hand back. The ground did not relax afterward. It stayed alert, like it had noticed contact and decided to remember it. As I stood up, I saw something in the soil nearby, a pattern forming. Not naturally, the dirt shifted in slow, subtle ways, arranging itself into shapes that only made sense from above. At first, I thought it was erosion, wind, water, anything logical. Then I realized what I was seeing. A face, not fully detailed, just enough structure to suggest eyes that were not meant to be there, and it was facing upward, toward me. I stepped back quickly. The pattern collapsed slightly, like it lost interest in being observed too closely. But it didn't disappear. It stayed half-formed, waiting. That night, the hum grew stronger, not louder in volume, closer in presence. I could hear it through the walls of the farmhouse now, through the floorboards, even through my own breathing when everything else stopped. It wasn't coming from one place anymore. It was everywhere beneath the property, like the entire farm had become a single connected circuit. I went outside again despite myself. The sky was wrong again, flat, low, and unmoving. The fields stretched out darker than they should have, as if absorbing more light than they reflected, and the hum had become rhythm, a pulse, steady, controlled, like something vast underneath was aligning itself with a pattern it had just finished remembering. I followed it without thinking. My steps didn't disturb the soil as much as they should have. The ground felt slightly delayed, like it was reacting after I had already moved on. I reached the center of the field. The hum stopped. Instantly, complete silence returned, but it didn't feel like peace. It felt like attention gathering in one place. Then the soil beneath me shifted, not collapsing, not opening, adjusting, like something underneath had turned its focus upward and changed position to match me. A pressure rose through the ground slowly, not pushing me up, just acknowledging I was there. I looked down. The dirt darkened in patches. Patterns forming again, but faster now, more confident. And I understood what I was looking at. Not faces this time. A structure. Something enormous mapped beneath the farm like a hidden architecture. Field lines were not utilities. They were connections. And whatever was beneath them was not dead or buried. It was distributed, spread across the entire land like it had been woven into it. A presence too large to be contained in one place, so it had been taught to exist everywhere at once. The hum returned, soft again, controlled again, but now it felt deliberate, like it had finished noticing me, and had decided I was part of the pattern worth maintaining. As I stepped backward slowly, the soil under my feet warmed again, not as warning, as recognition, and I realized something that settled worse than fear. I hadn't been standing above something all this time. I had been standing on it, while it slowly learned what I was. The bar no longer felt like part of the farm. It felt like a rule the farm followed. Every night, I noticed the same pattern forming in the dark. The rest of the land would go still first. Then the wind would stop. Then even the hum beneath the fields would soften, like it was holding itself back. And then the barn would decide it was time. I never saw it open. Not once. But I always knew when it had, because the silence would change shape. That night, I stood far enough away to watch it properly. The fog clung low around my legs, cold and damp, soaking into the fabric of my clothes without making a sound. The barn stood ahead, darker than the field around it. Not empty darkness. Full darkness, like light refused to settle on it for long. Then it happened. The barn door was open, just slightly at first. A narrow gap, as if something had pushed it from inside with patience instead of force. No wind, no impact, no sound of wood shifting. Just open. I didn't move immediately, because the air around it changed. Sound disappeared first. Even my breathing felt delayed, like it had to travel farther than usual to reach my ears. Then the space inside the barn became impossible to judge. Not dark, not lit, just depth without reference. Like looking into something that didn't agree with distance anymore. The door stayed still, waiting. I took one step closer. The ground beneath me felt less certain with each movement, like it was becoming less solid the nearer I got. The barn didn't react. It only remained open, patient. I stopped again just outside the threshold. Inside, there was no movement, no visible structure shifting. But something was wrong with the stillness. It felt occupied, not with presence I could see, with presence that refused to define itself. Then I heard it, a single step from inside, not forward, not backward, just existing somewhere within the space, as if direction didn't matter anymore. I stepped back immediately. The barn did not close. It never closed. It only opened or remained open. That was the rule it followed. Another pause stretched across the field, longer than it should have been. Then the silence broke again with movement inside. Not rushing, not approaching. Careful, measured, like something was testing whether being noticed would change its behavior. I didn't look away, but I also didn't look directly anymore, because looking felt like permission here, and I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to. The door shifted slightly wider. Still no force, no visible cause, just acceptance of change. The air around it tightened again, as if the barn was becoming more defined the longer it stayed open, more real, more aware of being observed. And then from inside, something stepped just close enough to be felt rather than seen. Not shape, not form, just presence pressing against the boundary where perception stops being reliable. I backed away slowly. The barn did not follow. It didn't need to, because I understood something then that felt worse than anything before it. It wasn't waiting to come out. It was waiting for me to decide that it was already outside. That night, the farm felt wider than usual. Not larger in size, but in awareness. Like everything had spread out just a little further to make room for something arriving. I noticed the visitors first through the window, shapes standing at the edge of the field. Not moving, not approaching, just present. There were more than one. I couldn't tell how many at first, because the fog kept swallowing their outlines and giving them back again in slightly different positions. But they were there, facing the house, always facing the house. I didn't open the door. I didn't need to. Their presence made itself known through the glass. The air inside the farmhouse tightened slowly, like the room was becoming aware of being observed from outside. I moved closer to the window, and that's when I saw their faces. Or what should have been faces. Smooth, undefined, no eyes, no mouths, no features to anchor identity. Just blank surfaces where recognition should have existed. I stepped back immediately. The moment I did, one of them shifted, not walking, not stepping, just repositioning itself slightly closer than before. No sound accompanied it. No disturbance in the grass, only change in distance. I realized then that looking at them might be part of how they moved. So I tried not to focus directly, but it didn't matter, because they were already responding. Another appeared beside the first, then another behind it, not arriving, multiplying, like attention itself was causing them to divide into more versions of themselves. I pulled the curtains slightly closed. The fabric felt heavier than normal in my hand, almost resistant, like it didn't want to be used to hide anything. But the shapes outside didn't stop. Even without direct sight, I could feel them, standing, waiting, then shifting again, closer. I stepped away from the window, but the feeling didn't leave. It followed the edges of the house, like they were circling now, not rushing, not testing force, just maintaining presence around every possible exit point. The farmhouse creaked softly, not from wind, from alignment, as if the structure itself was adjusting to accommodate being surrounded. Then I heard something outside the wall, not knocking, not scratching, a pause in space, like something had pressed its attention against the house and was waiting to see if it would respond. I didn't move. The pause lasted too long. Then it repeated, not louder, closer in meaning. I realized something unsettling then. They weren't trying to enter. They were trying to confirm boundaries, to understand where inside began, and whether it still meant anything here. I backed into the hallway slowly. The house felt different now, not safer, more defined, like it had started to separate itself from the outside world just enough to become noticeable again. Another presence shifted near the barn, then the shed, then the field beyond, all forming a loose perimeter that wasn't tightening, just clarifying itself. I understood the pattern then. They weren't breaking in. They were completing a shape. And I was already inside the outline they were finishing. The morning after the visitors, something inside my mind felt misaligned, not broken, not missing, just not entirely mine anymore. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the empty table where the milk had once appeared, where the photograph had once changed. And then it happened. A memory surfaced. Clear, sudden, too vivid to ignore. I was standing in the field, but I didn't remember walking there. The corn was taller than it should have been, bending inward as if forming a corridor instead of crop. The sky above it looked dimmer, like it had been viewed through old glass. And I was holding something, a small tool, metal, familiar in my hand in a way that made my chest tighten. I knew how it felt before I could name it, but I had never seen it before in my life. A voice called from somewhere behind me, not clearly, just directionally, as if the memory itself refused to fully form sound. Then another image layered over it, a circle drawn into soil. Symbols I didn't recognize and somehow already understood. My hand moved in the memory, not hesitating, not learning, performing. I stepped back from the kitchen counter in the present. The memory didn't fade. It stayed, like it had decided it was done waiting to be remembered. Another followed immediately. I was inside the farmhouse again, but older, different light, different arrangement of rooms. The same walls, but less uncertain, more permanent. I was writing something on paper. Names, some crossed out, some not. My handwriting, but I didn't recognize the purpose. My stomach tightened again, because the list matched the pattern I had seen before. The photograph, the note, the hidden room, all the same structure, different moments in time, repeating the same system. I pressed my hand to my head. The memories kept coming, not as stories, as fragments that assumed continuity, as if they had always belonged to me and were only now deciding to become visible. One more appeared. I was standing outside the barn, but not observing it, approaching it like I already knew what was inside. No hesitation, no curiosity, familiarity instead. That was the worst part. The feeling of recognition without origin. I looked out the window instinctively. The field was still, but I could no longer trust what still meant here. The corn moved slightly, not in wind, in response, like it was aware I was remembering something I shouldn't have access to. The memory shifted again. Now I was not alone in it. There were others, not faces I could clearly see, but presence, repetition, shared motion. And the farm was different, not new, revisited. I stepped back slowly from the window, because something worse than fear was forming now. Understanding without permission. These weren't new memories being placed inside me. They were old ones returning in the wrong order, and each one suggested the same impossible idea. that I wasn't learning the farm. I was remembering it, and the longer I stayed, the more convinced the memories became that I had never left it in the first place. After the memories, the farmhouse stopped feeling like shelter. It started feeling like imitation. Not fake in a simple way. Not abandoned. Just assembled. That morning, I noticed the hallway was slightly different. A door that used to face left now opened to the right. At first, I thought I was mistaken, but then I checked again. The angles were wrong. Subtle, precise, like someone had rebuilt the same space using memory instead of measurements. I stood in the center of the room for a long time. The house was quiet, but not empty. It felt like it was waiting to be corrected. A soft creak came from upstairs. Then another, not movement in the usual sense, more like rearrangement. I went up slowly. Each step felt slightly delayed, like the floor was remembering my weight after I had already lifted it. Upstairs, the rooms looked familiar, but not consistent. The bed was in the wrong corner. The window was slightly too narrow. The light didn't fall correctly across the walls. Everything felt like a version of home that had been rebuilt from partial instructions. Then I heard something, a sound I almost recognized. Familiar footsteps, but they weren't mine. They came from a room at the end of the hall. I stopped before reaching it. The door was slightly open. A soft light spilled through the gap. Warm, comfortable, wrong. Inside, I saw movement. Someone shifting items on a table. Slow, domestic, calm, like routine, like life continuing as if nothing was wrong. I stepped closer. The sound paused, not startled, just aware. Then it resumed, but slightly slower, as if it had adjusted to my presence. I pushed the door open fully. The room inside looked like the farmhouse should have looked all along. Clean arrangement, balanced furniture, familiar structure. But the details were incorrect in ways I couldn't immediately explain. Too perfect, too intentional, like it was trying to match my idea of normality instead of reality. No one was clearly visible inside, but I could feel someone had been there moments before, still present in the arrangement of objects. The way a chair was slightly turned toward the door, the way a cup was placed as if just set down, everything suggested occupancy without confirming it. I stepped inside slowly. The temperature changed immediately, warmer, comforting, almost convincing, and that was what made it worse. Because comfort didn't belong here anymore. The house had stopped feeling like it was hiding something. It felt like it was pretending nothing was wrong. A soft sound came from the wall behind the bed. Not a knock, not movement, more like agreement, as if the structure itself was responding to the idea of being observed. I backed toward the door, but the hallway outside looked slightly different now. Longer again, as if distance had been added while I wasn't paying attention. The room behind me remained perfectly arranged. Too perfectly arranged. And I realized something I didn't want to accept. This wasn't a house that had been abandoned and changed over time. It was a house that had learned how to behave like one, and it was getting better at it every time I noticed. The fields changed overnight again, but this time it wasn't subtle. It was visible the moment I opened the door. The corn looked freshly cut in wide sections, as if someone had harvested it in perfect silence. No tracks, no tools, no signs of labor, just absence where growth had been yesterday. I stepped outside slowly. The ground was damp, soft underfoot, still holding warmth that didn't belong to morning. And yet, it didn't feel finished. That was the strange part. It looked harvested, but it didn't feel emptied, like something had taken only what it needed and left the rest waiting. I walked toward the field. Each step revealed more the same pattern. Cut stalks, clean lines, perfect repetition. No randomness, no mistakes. Too precise for nature, too quiet for people. There were no tools anywhere, no machines, no human signs of work. But the harvest was everywhere. I knelt down and touched the soil. It was warm again, not from sunlight, from underneath. A faint vibration passed through it, steady and controlled, like something beneath the field was continuing work even after the surface was done. I stood back up quickly. The corn at the edge of the cut section shifted slightly, not growing, not regrowing, reforming, slowly rising back into place in uneven stages, as if time itself couldn't decide whether the harvest had happened or not. I stepped back. The field stopped, paused, waited, then resumed again, but differently, not fully regrowing, not fully staying cut, repeating the process in smaller sections, like it was stuck in a loop it refused to resolve. That night, I heard it. Not wind, not animals. Movement across the entire field. Soft, distributed, like labor happening without bodies. I watched from the window as shapes moved between the rows. Not clearly defined, just impressions of presence shifting through harvested land. No direction, no urgency, only repetition, as if something was continuing work that had no end condition. The barn light flickered in rhythm with it. Then the shed responded. Then the silo. Everything syncing again. But this time, it wasn't communication. It was continuation. The farm wasn't reacting to harvest anymore. It was performing it, again and again, without reset, without completion. I realized then that nothing here was ever finished. Not the fields, not the house, not even time. Everything was only temporarily paused between repetitions. And I was standing in the middle of something that had already been done too many times to remember the first beginning. The next morning, the fields were cut again, identically, as if the previous day had never decided what it was supposed to become. And somewhere beneath it all, the steady hum returned. Patient, unchanging, like the land itself refused to stop producing the same moment, until something finally remembered how to end it. The farm stopped pretending that night. There was no wind, no distant movement, no shifting fog. Even the hum beneath the fields faded into something held back, like the entire land was bracing for a single moment. I felt it before I saw anything. A pressure in the air, not pushing down, but spreading across everything equally, as if space itself was becoming aware of being observed. I stepped outside slowly. The sky looked wrong again. Too flat, too close, like a lid pressed gently over the world. The field stretched out beneath it, perfectly still, no harvest motion, no rearrangement, no looping growth. Everything had stopped, not peacefully, expectantly. Then the shape began to form, not in the sky at first, not on the ground, but everywhere at once in between. The space above the fields bent slightly, like distance had become soft, and through that bending, something revealed itself. Not fully, never fully. It didn't arrive like an object. It arrived like a condition. The kind of presence that makes everything else feel like a reflection of it rather than reality itself. The fields below it darkened in patches, not from shadow, but from recognition. Like the land itself was reacting to something it had always known was there. The shape was impossible to hold in one form. At times it looked like vast fields turned inside out. At times like sky folded into soil. At times like darkness learning how to stretch itself across structure. But none of those descriptions stayed consistent. Every time I tried to focus, it changed again, not randomly, deliberately, as if responding to perception itself. I stepped back without realizing it. The ground felt unstable beneath my feet, though it hadn't moved. The presence didn't descend. It didn't rise. It simply acknowledged everything at once. And in that acknowledgement, I felt something worse than fear. Recognition. Not mine. The farm's. Like the entire place had been waiting for this exact moment of visibility. The barn light flickered once in the distance. Then the silo answered. Then the shed. All of them aligning in perfect, silent synchronization. Not reacting to chaos, but confirming arrival. The shape above the field shifted slightly closer to coherence. And for a brief moment, I understood in a way I didn't want to understand. It wasn't visiting the farm. It was revealing what the farm had been built around, or grown around, or become part of. The soil beneath me warmed again. Not gently this time. Deeply, like something underneath had finally stopped pretending to be dormant. The presence above and below felt connected. Two parts of something that had been separated by perception alone, and I was standing between them. The shape did not speak. It did not need to, but everything in the farm responded anyway. The cornfields leaned inward slightly. The house creaked like it was remembering structure. Even the air felt arranged. And I realized then that I had been wrong about what I was seeing all along. This wasn't the demon arriving at the farm. It was the farm remembering the demon. And now that memory had become complete enough to exist again. It was no longer hiding. It was returning to its full outline. The silence after the demon revealed itself was not empty. It was complete, like the farm had stopped separating its parts and become one single thought again. I stood outside the farmhouse, unsure how long I had been there. Time didn't feel like something moving anymore. It felt like something paused between breaths. The sky remained flat and unmoving above the fields. The shape that had formed there was no longer visible in any clear way, but its presence hadn't left. It had only stopped needing form. Everything on the farm felt aligned now. Not calm, not resolved. Aligned. The barn, the silo, the shed, the fields, even the house itself. All of it held still in the same direction, like waiting for instruction that had already been understood long ago. And then I felt it. Not a sound, not a vision, a memory returning correctly for the first time. I was standing in the same place before, not as a visitor, as part of it. The fields weren't unfamiliar. They were repeated. The house wasn't new. It was maintained. The names I had seen, the photographs, the shifting rooms, the looping road, they weren't signs of something happening to me. They were records of cycles already completed, and I had been inside them before. The farm didn't trap people. It kept versions, layers, each one living the same sequence until it softened into the soil and became part of the structure again. I looked toward the barn. It wasn't opening anymore. It didn't need to. It already knew I was watching. The scarecrow stood in the field, closer than ever, but no longer moving, because it didn't need to approach anymore. It had already finished its role. The animals were gone from sight, but their presence remained in the way the land held attention. Even the wind didn't return. There was nothing left to interrupt what was becoming clear. The farm was not remembering me as a person. It was remembering me as a pattern, a position in something that had been repeating longer than my awareness could measure. The house door was open behind me, not inviting, not threatening, just available, like it always had been at this stage. Inside, I could feel the familiar arrangement of rooms shifting into place again, not changing, resetting, preparing. And I understood then what the photograph had been trying to show me all along. Every version of me that had stood here before had believed the same thing at the end, that it was the first time. But the farm never kept first times, only returns. The presence above and below the land no longer felt separate. It felt unified. Oh, and it didn't feel like something watching anymore. It felt like something continuing. The final realization didn't arrive as fear. It arrived as familiarity, because somewhere inside me, I recognized the rhythm of it. The corn, the light, the silence, the loops, the remembering, all of it. And as the farm settled into its steady, endless calm again, I stopped feeling like I had arrived here and started remembering when I stopped leaving.